Our next speaker will be talking to us about merger and acquisitions in the Marcellus production areas and analysis. His name is Tim Knobloch, the president of James Knobloch Petroleum Consultants based in Marietta, Ohio. Tim has been associated with the firm since '97, performing reservoir analysis and economic appraisals, estimating and auditing oil and gas reserves, providing litigation support, production analysis, oil and gas appraisals, and acquisitions and divestitures. That's a lot of stuff. Tim previously worked with Peak Energy as a district petroleum engineer, where he was responsible for estimating and auditing oil and gas reserves, AFE preparation, and disposal well permitting, monitoring, and reporting. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering from Penn State and is a certified minerals appraiser. Tim has been a lifelong member of the SBE and has co-authored technical papers for SBE Eastern Region meetings on both production analysis and corrosion. Please welcome Tim Knobloch. Go get him, man. Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I wanted to thank Marty Shumway for his assistance in preparing this work. He's a good friend, an associate, and without his help, this presentation would have happened today. I'd like to begin with a story. It's entitled Acres of Diamonds, and maybe some of you that are older have heard of this before. But in 1880, Russell Conwell, a Baptist minister and founder of Temple University, was giving a commencement speech. The central idea of the work is that one need not look elsewhere for opportunity, achievement, or fortune, but all the resources that you need are basically in your own community. In that speech, he gave a story and then two real examples of this approach. So, missed a line here, but basically the principle of this message was to dig in your own backyard. The first story starts out, and this is strictly an anecdotal story, but it was of a man who lived in a faraway land. He was richer than anyone could imagine. He had more money, a large family, large land possessions, did not want for a thing, but he heard about this item called diamonds, and he was just infatuated with it. So he sold all that he had, left his wife and family, and went in search of them, only to die penniless. The future owner of his property later found some rocks on the property and put them on a shelf, and someone was visiting him and said, "Hey, you got really big diamonds on your shelf." And the guy said, "No, those are just rocks I found in the stream here." And the story was, so they found lots of diamonds on this guy's property that he had left in search of. The next one is a real story, and remember this is in 1880. So there was a California man who had owned lots of acreage around Sutter's Mills. As most of you know, was where a large gold strike was found. But he left that land in search of gold, only to find out later that there was lots of gold where he existed. The next story, maybe a little more close to home, was that there was a gentleman up in a little town called Titusville, and he owned a lot of acreage there. And at that time, he heard somehow about coal oil, and really he wanted to go somewhere to find out where this coal oil was. So he sold his acreage for about $833. And only a short time later was told by the state geologist that it was worth millions. This kind of brings to mind maybe someone that you know who had a lot of acreage in the Appalachian Basin and left it only to go out in search of something somewhere else, only for us to find out how great of a resource or diamonds that we had beneath us. I still believe that there's more diamonds out there. And so what other opportunities are there in our backyard? When I started this presentation, I wanted to be clear that I had a couple objectives for you and for me to be able to present. I've noticed over time that the presentations given by companies really provide a lot of good information, but they seem either focused on that person's acreage or assets, or somebody's, it stops at the state line, either for Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Ohio. I want to give you an overall view of the plays. 2, that each one of you should walk away with a better understanding of, 1, where development occurred, who developed it, and basically how the reserves vary greatly across the play. So let's see what we're going to cover today. First, I'm going to cover the 2010 through 2015 mergers and acquisitions summary. We'll then look at kind of a progression of the development of the plays. I'll then take a look at the database that I've been working on, or we'll take a look at the database that I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years. Take a look at the summary of activity by state, and then look at a little more detailed analysis by state and producing formation, focusing on the Marcellus and the Utica. And then finally, I'll give you a summary. Let's start off with some of the observations that I made when I looked back at the acquisitions over 2010 through 2014. I noticed that there was a lot of big companies that came back to this basin: Exxon, Shell, Chevron. We also noticed that there was a lot of new companies that came to our basin that we had never seen before. I won't list them all here, but you can see the names, and some of the companies had never existed prior to these shale plays. Secondly, we noticed that a lot of capital came in from overseas: South Korea, Britain, Norway, Japan, France, and India. And there may be others. But again, there was a lot of attention that this basin was getting. So let's take a look at how that activity occurred over time. So in looking at from 2010 through 2014, when you look at the Marcellus, you can see that we had 33, 31, down to 17, totaling 113 acquisitions during that time. For the joint plays, 12, and the Utica, 78, for a total of 203 acquisitions. All this data today is courtesy of Rivington Holdings and Richardson Barr. When we look at the value of the deals, and this should stun a few people, but these are billions of dollars that were spent. And for a total there, we have $48.8 billion. Not much, it's nothing to sneeze at. And all of this information is going to be made available. I'll release it to OOGA, or it's available from me if you need it. Be glad to provide it to you. So when we look at some more details on the 2010 through 2015 Marcellus deals, and this goes, you can see companies that you know of. I think what's interesting is the amount paid, and you can see where I've highlighted a couple of them, of Southwestern with Chesapeake, $5.375 billion, and then the American Energy, $1.75 billion. Look at also the amount of dollars per acreage paid. To pay $13,000 an acre, $10,000 an acre. Just numbers that were unheard of in our basin before this. These were a summary of some of the Utica deals that were made. And again, over time, you can see how some of those values have come down a little bit. And I won't say that's a general trend that we're seeing right now, that we've come off maybe that $20,000 an acre and coming down, I hate to say come down to $10,000 an acre, but we've come down quite a bit. So let's look back. So since 2008, we've roughly had 8,000, 10,000 wells drilled, but I'll say 8,000. And let's just say for discussion purposes at $10 million a well. So there's been $80 billion spent on the drilling and completion of wells. Since 2010, we've had roughly $60 billion spent on acquisitions. So we've had a total of $140 billion. Let's go ahead and throw in another, I don't know what this number is, but let's just say $5 billion for additional leases. Let's throw in $5 billion for infrastructure, and both of those numbers are probably light. So what do you get for $150 billion? I'm going to move on to we'll talk about it here in the progression of development. Let's take a peek first at the rig count since 2010. I won't say Kentucky's a non-issue, but there hasn't been a lot of activity in Kentucky over this time. Rig activity is down, but they do have a considerable number of horizontal wells, primarily by Equitable. New York, they've shot themselves in the foot for now. We move on to Ohio, and you can see where Ohio took off basically in 2010 and peaked. And there may be a few vertical rigs in here, but the majority these are horizontal rigs. So we peaked at 46 rigs in 2014, and we've come off that number fairly quickly. In Pennsylvania, we peaked at 129, and we're down to 19. And finally, in West Virginia, we had peaked at a number of 29 or 30, and are now down to 10 rigs in West Virginia. That column on the right, so showing the top number of rigs, is current. That was from the March rig data information, showing where Antero currently has 9 rigs, Rice with 5, EQT with 3, Gulfport 3, Range 2, and XTO with 2. So 24 of the 41 rigs are accounted for. General oil field talk is that most of this rig activity is out to hold the leases, which I can understand after the considerable investment made. The next issue I want to bring up is just on the permitting activity, and I'll just focus on Pennsylvania. You can see where they've had about 22,000 permits issued, and we currently have about 6,700 wells showing production. There's been about 10,000 wells that have been spudded, which is a lot of you know, maybe they just spud the conductor or the surface hole, but the actual well was never drilled. There's probably also 1,500 or a couple thousand wells at best of completed wells that haven't been turned in for production. Let's look next, kind of a graphic view of this. So you can see on this map, anything that's shown in gray is basically where it's at now. You're going to see blue dots that pop up for the Marcellus and red dots for the Utica. So of course in 2006, the activity starts in Washington County, PA, home to the famous Wren's Well from Range Resources. You can see where that activity picks up a little bit in Washington County and drops down into Wetzel County and I believe Harrison County in West Virginia. Into 2008, we start to see some activity up in northeast Pennsylvania in Bradford, Tioga, Susquehanna, in an area that traditionally there's nothing up there. There was no infrastructure and very little traditional oil and gas activity. You can see that we begin to explode a little bit in 2009. 2010, it takes off up in northeast Pennsylvania. Finally, in 2011, the Utica takes off in Ohio with a few wells across the border into Pennsylvania. If you notice up in the upper right-hand corner, and I believe it's Tioga County, you also see a dot for the Utica. That was Shell with a great open flow, and I can't quote the number, but that shows you what else could be coming in our future. We then go ahead and go into 2013 and 2014, and you can see the status of the play at that time. We are fairly concentrated in just a few different areas. Southeast Pennsylvania, northeast Pennsylvania, and in about 2 or 3 counties of Ohio. Take a peek at the production associated with that. So this is for the natural gas. So for every well that was out there, we went ahead and forecasted the production. The Pennsylvania volumes are in green, the Ohio in red, the West Virginia in blue, and the total then listed at the bottom in black. But we have cummed 13,300 BCF of gas out of Pennsylvania. And then we have an associated 50-year EUR of 45,000 BCF from those wells. And you can look at the other totals with showing us a 56,000 BCF. There was a time in our not too recent past when any one of us would have loved to have had 1 BCF well in our count of wells that we had. That was the gem that we would hope to get. So to get our heads around having multiple BCFs of a well is just unheard of. Marty mentioned this number earlier, and it just astounded me when you finally see the volumes. But you can see out of Pennsylvania that we have produced 14 million barrels of oil/condensate. In Pennsylvania, or in Ohio, over 25 million barrels, and in West Virginia, over 10 million barrels. And you can see that we have a EUR associated with those of over 200 million barrels of oil. That is just huge. About 5 or 6 years ago, I knew that I wasn't going to be on a rig site in charge of the drilling and completion, or drilling of a well. I knew of a horizontal well. I knew that I wasn't going to be in charge of the drilling or the completion of the well, and I probably wasn't going to be in charge of the production of the well. But I knew it was going to be an important part of our basin, and I would most likely start seeing some of the production from those wells. So I thought it would probably be a good thing for me to try and understand it better. So I utilized the help of some Marietta College petroleum engineering technicians as my help, and we started reviewing all the completion reports for every horizontal well. It was my goal to really understand the relationship between the completion and the EUR for each of the formations. In our data set today, we're basically looking at 8,000 wells with greater than 60 days of production. Frankly, I think that in order to be able to put a decline curve on many of these wells, we almost need 150 days or more, but we attempt to work sometimes with 60 days. Our basic information that we focused on was Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, although we will be adding in Kentucky. We looked at the basic header information as well as the completion dates. We then looked at the detailed information of the perf intervals, the number of stages, the lateral length, stage volumes, pressures, rates. Our attempt here was to determine the total treated lateral, that interval that was treated, estimate the EUR, and then come up with the EUR per 1,000 feet. At least something to get us in the ballpark. We update the wells every month. We update the production. In Pennsylvania, it's done monthly. In Ohio, it's done quarterly. And in West Virginia, while they do provide monthly data, that's done on a yearly basis. They normally release the numbers in about May. About twice a year, we'll update all 8,000. It'll probably be 10,000 wells this year of all the decline curves for each of those. I just can't see updating them every month. It would just become an insurmountable task. In doing this task, we recognize that, one, there's limitation with state-reported data, and I can't fault operators for only providing what they need to provide or required to, but it does have its limitations. We recognize that these lateral wells are limited by the reservoir. You know, you can only use what God blessed you with. So we're reservoir thickness, total organic content, thermal maturity, pressure, permeability, depth, and natural fractures, amongst others. I've come to recognize how important lateral placement is, but it's also the lateral length and offset well spacing. On the completion side, we know it comes down to number of stages. I think when this play started, we were looking at 1,000-foot stages. That came down to 500 feet, came down to 250. I believe the number is closer to 150-foot stage spacing. We also recognize perf cluster spacing, type fluids, water and sand volumes and rates. I would tell everyone here, though, when we look at most of the completion reports, once that lateral is laid, it seems to go on a manufacturing process to some extent. It's just very organized going from the end to the heel. We just see regular spacing of those completion spacings. Finally, it comes down to production. And we look at we've seen controlled production rates. Most of you have maybe seen the presentation by Rice Energy where they control the production. We also know that liquid loading is a factor, and also the line pressure. Markets in certain areas sometimes keep production controlled, and operators' choices not to produce the gas. I've recognized that there's still a lot to learn, and that's not a bad thing. Let's get into some of the activity by state. What we've done is take each one of the states and listed the top operators. So when you look at Ohio, for example, the ones that are in bold represent basically 50% of the wells drilled. So that in Ohio, for example, 50% of the wells drilled were drilled by Chesapeake. In Pennsylvania, 4 companies accounted for all the wells drilled. Range, Chesapeake, as we saw in Ohio, Talisman, and Cabot. And finally, in West Virginia, it was Antero, Chesapeake, and Equitable. Relatively small number of operators accounting for the wells. Similarly, when you looked at Ohio, or looked at it by county, in Ohio, basically 2 counties accounted for about half the wells that were drilled. In Pennsylvania, it was 3 counties accounting for half, and in West Virginia, it was 3 counties. All of this is just part of the story, but I did point out something. So when we look at it in total, 16 operators accounted for 80% of the wells. 7 operators accounted for 50% of the wells. When we looked at the number of counties, 20 counties accounted for 80%, and 8 counties accounted for half the wells so far. Let's get into it a little bit more. So what we did on the EUR side, trying to come to EUR BCF equivalent per 1,000 feet, we estimated the EUR for every well. We then estimated the total treated length. That was either based upon the surface to bottom hole location when we didn't have anything else to go by. We looked at the true measured depth, or the total measured depth, versus the true vertical depth, or at the best would be the top perf and the bottom perf distance. We then converted the oil to gas at a 15-to-1, and that's what we used as the basis. So this would be a picture of all the Marcellus wells that were drilled that we had in the database that we're showing today. In Ohio, 10 wells, Pennsylvania, almost 6,000, and in West Virginia, about 1,000. So when we look at a broad map of the BCF per 1,000 feet, I'd like you to focus on a few things. One, the colors and the distribution. Is that the colors that are blue are on the lower end of the spectrum. Although when we started this play, a BCF per 1,000 feet still seemed like a lot, so I don't take it lightly. But you can see where the darker colors are in the southwest corner of Pennsylvania, and I call it the big dog, seems to be up in northeast Pennsylvania, where we're seeing multiples of BCF, where you see 4 to 5 BCF per 1,000 feet. And we'll look at Susquehanna County specifically here. On this particular graph, you'll also notice a graph, or the mean, the median, and the number of wells that were included in that set, as well as a graphical representation of the distribution. in the lower right-hand corner. So when we look at somewhat of an isopack of the BCF per thousand, it just accentuates where those hot spots were, northeast Pennsylvania and southwest Pennsylvania. This doesn't necessarily account for the gas quality where we have wet gas, only for where we just accounted for the least condensate or oil production. So let's look at it in a more graphical presentation and where we can see the completions per year. So we started out low in 2006, blossomed by 2011, and then we've slowed down again in our count of completed producing wells. In the next column, you can see the average EUR per 1,000 feet. Next column was the total EUR, and then finally the average total treated length. And you can see how that's increased over time from 2,000 to 5,000 feet. But notice that we have an average of about 7 BCF per well, close to about 1.5 Bs per 1,000 feet in aggregate. When we look at the distribution by county, by the top 12, you can see what tops the list is Susquehanna, followed by Bradford, then to Washington, then we head back up north to Lycoming, back south to Greene, back up north to Tioga and Wyoming, and then down to West Virginia, Butler, and Doddridge. And you can see the same metrics for each one. But again, notice the distribution of the wells. When we look at the top operators, it makes sense that it comes down to the ones we had talked about earlier: Chesapeake, Cabot, and Cabot's primary play was up in northeast Pennsylvania. Range, of course, was in the southwest and some up in the northeast. Equitable primarily in southwest Pennsylvania. Let's look first in detail at the Marcellus in Marshall County. And what I want to point out here is that oftentimes we talk about certain counties and we speak about it very generally. And what this map shows is that we do see a pretty significant variation across the county, whereas it's somewhat light up in the northwest, but you can see that we get upwards of 2 BCF per 1,000 feet down in that southeast corner. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the counties, as I go through them, you'll notice a map down in the lower left-hand corner showing the location of the county. I threw in a few production decline curves, and that third measurement up is about 100,000 MCF per month. But you can see the decline of these wells in Marshall County. Two important points is that I use a standard 1.2 B factor for the shape of the wells. I try to let the decline rate itself that the wells have be my starting rate. If I don't have enough data, I typically start out at about a 60% decline. But you can see how some of that doesn't work, and only time will tell what the shape of these curves are. The other point that I would note to you for the oil volumes, how steeply they decline in these counties, or this county. So when we look at it graphically, we can see that the top operator is Chesapeake, followed by CNX, and then Gas Star. And the average there being 1.7 BCF per 1,000 feet for Chesapeake. I won't spend a lot of time on those particular charts. Okay. Let's look at Doddridge County. That's located due south of Marshall, about 2 counties. Go past Wetzel and you'll find Doddridge. And again, you'll see that great variation across the county, where in certain places it's a little light, although most of the county seems to have about a 1.1 BCF per 1,000 feet, with the higher EURs being in the northern part of the state. When you look at the decline curves for those wells, you can see that those ones look fairly similar. In all of these, we don't really have any 30-year decline curve to go by. And with the changing in completions, it really makes a difference on the performance of these wells. Again, notice the light fluid count and how quickly it dissipates. So when you look at it in a chart, we can see that Antero was the lead player here in Doddridge, followed by Equitable, as far as the EUR per, the total EUR basically. Although CNX was getting about 1.7 BCF per 1,000 feet, while other operators, Antero was getting about 1.1 BCF. So again, a good variation. I'll point out to you now that when we look at wells on the same pad, we don't necessarily get the same BCF per 1,000 feet. Even if they're started at the same time, seem to be treated with the same number of completion stages, it varies by well. Let's look next at Marcellus in Greene County. And you can see the distribution there as well, where it's lighter. We see in the southeast corner down to 0.2, 0.7 BCF per 1,000 feet. Towards the center of the state, or center of the county there, over 2 BCF per 1,000 feet. Again, a look at the decline curves for those areas, where we have relatively steep decline for the first year, and then tailing off. In Pennsylvania, it was a little rough when they first started. For the first up through 2015, information was reported on a 6-month period, and it's just tough interpreting that type of data. So when we look at Greene County ranked by total EUR, of course Chesapeake is at the top, but you do see a variation in the EUR per 1,000 feet. And this is really dependent upon where those wells were located. Okay. Now, this is an area that's just phenomenal. I liken it to go to, when you go to California, for example, when you go to the redwood forest, and you look at those trees of 30 to 50 feet in diameter and a couple hundred feet tall, at every one of them you just look and go, wow. Well, with every one of these wells I looked at, I was going, wow. And so we're looking at wells in that central area of Susquehanna County at over 4 to 5 BCF per 1,000 feet. This is also an area where there's 400 foot of Marcellus shale. It has an upper and lower Marcellus shale. I believe most of the wells here have been completed in the lower Marcellus shale, but there's more opportunity up there. So here's some of the decline curves for that data. There were wells there that if I would have backed into them, that one in the lower left-hand corner was probably over 500,000 MCF a month. We actually had one well up there that was over 5 BCF within a 6-month reporting period. And that's just wow. The blue that's represented here on this particular graph is the water production. We recently included that. So when you're looking at all of the Cabot wells, you can see that they're averaging over 3 BCF per 1,000 feet. Southwestern was about 2 BCF. This is definitely a great area. The good news, bad news is it's all dry gas, a very tough market, and pricing is very low up there. So let's get to the Utica. That's the extent of what we're showing in our database for right now. And you do see a sampling of wells up there scattered across northern Pennsylvania, and a couple that we're starting to show up down in West Virginia. But primarily this play is Ohio and just along the border in Pennsylvania. So we had 944 wells, Ohio 876, Pennsylvania 67, West Virginia we had 1. When you're looking at the BCF equivalent per 1,000 feet, you can see that the darker colors tending towards red are down in Belmont County for now. Very prolific wells down in that area, gas-producing wells, although we've had some great wells up in Carroll County as well. So when you look at the an isopac of that, you can again, so this just highlights that the highest area is down in the Belmont County area, and this is Rice Energy. So I'm down to Utica by completion year. Marty and I started looking at some statistical information, and some of that was good correlation. This unfortunately was not. Saw better correlation there. And we saw pretty good correlation between time there. Okay. Let's look at by Utica, by county, by EUR per 1,000 feet. And you can see again, this is what I pointed out earlier, that it's Belmont, and we had good results in Monroe County, followed up by Jefferson, Noble, Guernsey. And then Morgan County was tailing up here for the top 12. This just gives you a statistical count of the wells completed by county. So I recognize that in time, as more wells are drilled and more technology applied, that these numbers will change, and what we've shown will change. Let's look at the total EUR, and it's not surprising that where we maybe had the most wells, we have the more EUR, but Belmont's coming up quickly. Then the average EUR per 1,000 feet, as the maps had shown, Belmont County is the leader, followed up by Monroe, then Jefferson, tailing right on down. But in general, you're seeing over a BCF per 1,000 feet. So let's look at the top operators. Of course, that's Chesapeake. This is by total EUR. So you look at Chesapeake, and they were 3,000 BCF equivalent. Their average total treated length was 5,800 feet. Gulfport, with just 140 wells, 1,800 BCF equivalent. And you can see the various BCF per 1,000 feet. And this is just the total wells completed by operator. This one you may find interesting, but it's the EUR per 1,000 feet of the top 12 operators, at least as far as our analysis is for now. And Rice leads the pack here for today. And this is the remaining companies. We were just fortunate to be able to get them all on two graphs. Okay. Let's look at some of the EURs per 1,000 feet by county. So when you look at the Utica and Carroll County, you can see the distribution there where it gets kind of light in the EUR per 1,000 feet as you trend west, which doesn't surprise too many people here. And the EUR per 1,000 feet definitely increases going to the southeast. We had a median of just 1 BCF per 1,000 feet for the entire county. So take a peek at the decline curves. I have a feeling that some of that oil declines are going to steepen just a little bit. If I were to look at these one more time, I would probably trend those downward a little bit, but we'll see what time shows us. You also notice the water production there occurring with these wells also. Just a few examples. So ranking the operators in Carroll County, it comes down to Chesapeake, RE Gas, and Enervest, and 1.6 for Chesapeake for their 361 wells. Okay. Taking a look at Belmont County. We've not seen quite the activity there in Belmont County, but you're seeing pretty good numbers, even in the there along the northwest side of over 2 BCF per 1,000 feet, and in the center over 4 BCF per 1,000 feet. When you look at the top, those top two decline curves, Bigfoot and Blue Thunder, those are both rice-operated wells. They come out and tell you that they're basically constraining production for the first couple of years, believing that they will result in better wells. I would tell you that when you look at all the wells, it appears so. I don't know exactly what that decline rate will be at the end of as time goes on, but we put a little steeper decline curve on, and that's not. I likened it to our Beekman Town wells that we sometimes used to have to constrain production on. So when you rank the Belmont County, you can see the 63, 16, and 10 by ascent, with the average EUR per 1,000 foot varying from 2.6 down to 1.2. So maybe Rice is on to something. And when we look at Noble County, same thing as what I've been telling you throughout the presentation, is that you see a pretty good variation of EUR per 1,000 feet variation across a county. So you can't just generalize and say Noble County has all this kind, but you can see that there are better wells up in that northeast corner than there definitely are in the southwest so far. There's a few of the decline curves for that area. You can see the pretty steep decline on these wells. Okay. We just had 5 companies there: Antero, CNX Gas, and RE Gas. BCF per 1,000 feet looks like generally for that 1.3, and falls downhill from there for now. Take a look at Harrison County, go a little bit further north in the state. And again, you see a wide distribution of the EURs. Some definitely better wells up there in the north central area of over 2 BCF per 1,000 foot. Although you do see some down in the southwestern part at over 4 BCF per 1,000 foot. So some fairly decent wells there. And there are the decline curves that we have on so far. When we look at the ranking for Harrison County, of course, Chesapeake comes to the top, just strictly for the number of wells they've drilled. And you can see that Hess really had the best results in Harrison County of 1.8 BCF per 1,000 feet. So let's get to the end. So in summary, you were able to see basically the distribution of Marcellus wells and Utica wells and how that has transformed over time. About 8,000 wells, and there's a distribution of the wells across the states. We've seen that there were some pretty darn good areas, especially up in northeast Pennsylvania as far as BCF per 1,000 feet. When you map those areas, you could see where the better areas were. and that the Marcellus encountered about 28,000 square miles, the Utica 9,400 square miles. My main point here, look at the bottom section of this, or look at this particular graph. That's EUR per 1,000 feet lateral greater than 1 BC. For the first one, that's greater than 1 BCF. So that accounts for about 3,000 square miles. Greater than 2 BCF is just 495 square miles. Greater than 3 BCF, 17 square miles. So it's really focused. So I think we've all seen that there's been changes in drilling that have affected drilling, completion, and production that have affected the results of the wells. And I hope to look into this further as time goes on. I told you several times that the results vary not only from county to county, but even across the county from township to township. As I told you that the results vary from well to well, even on the same well pad. And I would just suggest to each of you that even in these tough times, that we just keep looking for our acres of diamonds. This time will provide some opportunity for some, while it's a little bit harder times for others. But I think we can all see the other side of this. I'll just say thank you for your time today. Hope you enjoyed this. I'll take any questions, but I know
We
we're
have
kind of
time
short
for
of time.
one or two short questions if you.
If you have them, I'll try to answer, but
Have you done any analysis on the number of wells per well site?
no, I have not. We've just finally gotten through most of the data, getting it into a format where we can finally compare one to another. But that's part of the work that Marty and I will be looking at in the months ahead here, and hopefully provide that to you later on.